Hey everyone, so welcome back to my series of Marvel Cinematic Universe reviews leading up to Avengers Infinity War, which is now coming out a week earlier on April 27th as opposed to May 4th. So, I gotta hurry up with these. So today I'm going to be talking about Fury's Big Week. Not this comic book, but the three Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that do technically take place all within the same week. And that is going to be The Incredible Hulk, the decent one, Iron Man 2, and the first Thor movie. Since I need to really get caught up on these, I figured I would just combine all three of those movies' reviews in one video, because I don't have a whole lot to say about all three of them. They're kind of three of the weaker films in the Marvel Universe. And like I said, they're decent ones to compress into one, because as detailed by this official Avengers tie-in comic, they actually all take place at the same time in 1 week, called Fury's Big Week. So chronologically, it doesn't really matter a whole lot when you watch each film. I usually just watch them in release order, so Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, and Thor. Just because, you know, instead of like watching the first 30 minutes of Iron Man 2 and then watching 10 minutes of The Incredible Hulk and then back to the first 5 minutes of Thor and then finishing Iron Man 2, and then it's way too much. It's too complicated to actually watch it in the correct chronological order. Where you'd have to stop and start each movie at particular times. I'm not going to do that, because that's way too complicated. I just go in the way they were released, because that just works for me. So let's get started. I am joined, as you can see, by my cat, who did not want to move. So we're going to leave her. So we're going to start with The Incredible Hulk. So not to be confused with the 2003 Ang Lee Hulk movie, which is not very good. It's super boring. We're not going to get into that one. A lot of people think that The Incredible Hulk is a sequel to that. It's actually not. It's totally a reboot. That Hulk movie has nothing to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's not a part of it at all. And this really isn't a sequel, because that movie is really, really bad, and I'm going to stop talking about it now. Get that out of here. So we're not talking about that one, because let's not. It's so bad. So The Incredible Hulk, I actually think, is a pretty decent movie. It's not great. It's not incredible. But it's okay. It's definitely watchable. It's the best live-action Hulk movie we've ever gotten. Mainly by default. But it's fine. I think Edward Norton is a pretty good Bruce Banner. It is unfortunate, sort of like Terrence Howard as Rhodey in Iron Man. It's unfortunate that it was a good performance, but it's recast later by somebody who's so much better and is just the absolute perfect person for this role, that it really does overshadow Edward Norton. And that is part of the reason why a lot of people are surprised that The Incredible Hulk is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because there aren't a whole lot of references to it, and they do recast the Hulk. So this is sort of the forgotten movie that's not talked about a whole lot, and that a lot of people aren't even really aware that it's part of this, but it is. It is official Marvel Cinematic Universe canon. So I think the rest of the cast is pretty great. You have Liv Tyler as Betty Ross. She does a great job in this movie. She's a very good Betty Ross. She's not the greatest Marvel love interest in the world, but she does well in this movie. I think her and Edward Norton have pretty good chemistry together. They are a pretty believable on-screen couple, and I enjoy seeing them together. William Hurt as General Ross is pretty perfect. I mean, he's got that stash. He's got the voice, and he's the tough, strong, determined military guy, and he does that really well. And you can see that he is a decent adversary for the Hulk, despite the Hulk being the Hulk and him just being a regular guy. He's still, as a strategist and a tactician, and having basically the army as his weapon, he's pretty good foe. The main villain of the movie, Emil Blonsky, the Abomination, is played by Tim Roth, and I think he does a good job. He's kind of hammy in places. He gets really into that, oh, I'm a monster, I'm so evil, and it can be a little cheesy, but I think it works well within the movie. The movie itself could be cheesy at times, so he works within the context of the movie, and I really actually do like the Abomination redesign a lot. In the comics, he kind of looks like a fish man, and he looks pretty ridiculous. In this one, I think he looks a lot better, and I would say that overall the Abomination is an improvement in this film than in the comics. So the special effects are kind of dated now, to be honest. It looked great when I remember seeing it in 2008 when it first came out. I remember thinking the Hulk looked pretty amazing. But it's not terrible anymore. But, like the sequence in the rain when Hulk and Betty are in the cave in the rain, and the Hulk is supposed to be wet, he just looks really shiny, as opposed to wet. It doesn't look great. It's the worst instance for me of the special effects, and it doesn't look terrible. It's still better than that Ang Lee one that I'm done talking about now, I promise. But it's not as good as like in the Avengers and in Thor Ragnarok and the other times that we've seen the Hulk in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And sometimes during the climax when Hulk is fighting Abomination, it kind of looks like a video game cutscene. Mostly just shots. It's not the entire sequence. It doesn't look like garbage. But you don't really forget that you're looking at CGI. It's the climax isn't the most emotional thing. Abomination and Hulk don't really have the biggest or best connection in the world to make them the best adversaries. It's just sort of Emil Blonsky wants to be like the Hulk and wants to have that power to be a great soldier, so he turns himself into the Abomination, and then, oh no, I have to stop the Abomination because he's a bad guy and he's destroying the city. That's most of the extent of where that goes. But the fight is fun to see, even if it is just a big CG extravaganza where they're throwing each other through buildings, and Hulk cuts the car in half and uses the halves of cars like boxing gloves. That's fun, but you don't forget that you're looking at CG. Oh, I must have gotten a little too excited. She's not happy with me right now. So that's really most of what I have to say. I think it's an entertaining enough movie. I like all the action. Hulk has always been one of my favorite superheroes. For a while there, he was my all-time favorite superhero. And when this movie came out, he was probably my second favorite Marvel character. So I was really into this movie when it came out. I was 10. So I loved the Hulk. I loved this movie. And so I think a lot of it is kind of a nostalgia factor for me. I've spent half of my lifetime with this movie, and I don't really see any major flaws with it. It slows down a little in the middle, but not to where it gets boring for me. I like the kind of manhunt aspect where Betty and Bruce are on the run. And I like the throwbacks to the original TV show with Lou Ferrigno, where he is on the run, and they even play the music at one point from the original show, and I really appreciate that. I think that's a nice touch, and it does remind me a lot of that. And so, overall, I think it's a totally enjoyable movie. I like it. I have no problems rewatching it. It is kind of forgettable, especially in the grand scheme of the MCU. I mean, we've never seen Buddy Ross again. We've heard of the Abomination in this tie-in comic and in a short film on the Thor Blu-ray. And that's all we've ever heard of the Abomination after this. They recast Bruce Banner with somebody better, and we didn't even get General Ross back until Civil War. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not overly important. If you feel like skipping it, you probably could. But I think it is a solid Hulk origin film. I like the way that it doesn't spend 2 hours talking about his origin. It does it like in a montage in the beginning, in the opening title sequence, because most of us know the origin of the Hulk, and I like that they kind of got through that. They showed you what it was, but didn't dwell on it, and the rest of the movie could just be kind of a fun adventure that ultimately is a little forgettable, but I enjoy it, especially when I do have the kind of hankering to watch it, or when I watch it as part of an Avengers build-up marathon. I really do enjoy it. So, sorry, I got distracted by the 3D cover. So next, we're going to move on to Iron Man 2. My least favorite movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's really boring, for one. There's like maybe 20 minutes worth of action in this over 2 hour movie, which is really disappointing, especially because the first Iron Man was so good. It's such a strong movie. It kicks off the entire MCU, and it holds up to this day. It's still phenomenal. It's one of the best. And so when the sequel was coming out, I remember being really excited because I really liked the first Iron Man. And one day I was going to go see it with my dad in the theaters, and we tried to look up showtimes to see when we could see it. And it wasn't there anymore. We couldn't find it in any theaters that were within reasonable driving distance from us. And the movie had been out for less than a month. And it just wasn't around anymore, at least where we were. So, as far as I know, it did okay critically and money-wise. I don't think it blew anyone away. But, yeah, it wasn't the best, and a lot of people do feel like that. So again, Robert Downey Jr. obviously is perfect as Tony Stark. He's so charismatic. He's so much fun. He is the saving grace of this movie. Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark, Iron Man. He's perfect. He's so good in the movie, despite not having a whole lot to work with. And I really like all the Iron Man suits. My favorite sequence in the whole movie is when he gets the suitcase armor, and he opens it up and puts it on. Unfortunately, that was spoiled in the trailer for the movie, so we'd already seen it. Because it was one of the most surprising and pretty awesome parts of the movie, and then he fights Whiplash for, like, 3 seconds. So it ends up being disappointing. It's a bad action sequence, but it's a really cool moment building up to it. Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts continues to be fine. I wouldn't say that I can't see anyone else playing Pepper Potts ever, but I'm not disappointed or bothered by her performance. She does all right. Mickey Rourke as Whiplash is really cheesy and really boring, and I did not care. He's my second least favorite villain in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's just really weak. I mean, he, like, does have a personal connection, kind of, with Tony, because Tony's dad kind of screwed his dad over, so he's upset with him for that and wants to kill him for that. I guess it's better than, like, Abomination and Hulk, but it's still not anything groundbreaking for me. And then he just kind of uses arc reactor tech to make whips and shows up for the one scene on the racetrack, and Iron Man puts on the suitcase suit and beats him in 3 seconds, and then, like, goes away for a long time, and then shows back up talking to Justin Hammer, who is great in this movie. Sam Rockwell, Justin Hammer, is pretty good. He's kind of like the Tony Stark gone bad kind of thing. He's very similar. He's a weapons manufacturer. He's rich. He's kind of the playboy. But he doesn't really have the same morals that Tony does after becoming Iron Man. And he basically wants the Iron Man tech for himself to make weapons and become profitable from that. So he enlists Whiplash to sort of help him with that, which means that Whiplash makes some generic drones for Iron Man to just shoot at the end, and then shows up in a giant Iron Man suit, because we didn't already see that literally in the movie before this. And again, Iron Man and War Machine beat him in 3 seconds. It's not even a scene. He whips them, and then they blow him up. So aside from some disappointing villains, we get the introduction of War Machine and Black Widow in this movie, both of whom are very cool characters. I like Don Cheadle as Rhodey a lot. I think he's better casting than Terrence Howard. I think he really brings a lot to the role. He seems to be having fun with it. He's enjoying himself. And he brings kind of that stern, like, you know, the straight man to Tony's kind of wild card. And I like the action scene where him and Tony fight in the house to get and he steals the Mark II suit that turns into the War Machine suit. I think the War Machine suit looks awesome. I like that he was sort of working for Hammer unknowingly. Like, he didn't really know what was going on with Hammer. And then he takes over the suit and he has to overcome it. Black Widow has to hack into it, whatever. So I like him. He's a good side character. He's a good equal to Tony. He's, like I said, a good straight man. And I enjoy him. I enjoy his performance a lot. Black Widow's in this movie. I'm going to move on from this really fast because I can think about Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow all day. She does really good. The introduction is pretty solid. I like the kind of bait and switch where she's working for S.H.I.E.L.D. And the costume looks cool. And it's a decent introduction to her character. It kind of sets up for the Avengers, which I'm going to transition. I'm going to use that as a transition so that I don't talk about her for hours. Most of this movie is Avengers setup, which should be exciting, because at this point we kind of had a feeling the Avengers was coming, since this movie won't shut up about the Avengers Initiative and S.H.I.E.L.D. So we kind of knew the Avengers was coming, but this really just didn't do it as well as they should have. For the most part, Marvel did a great job setting up the universe and setting up the Avengers, with giving each character their own standalone film and just building the universe like that. This movie felt like, in case that didn't work, let's put an Iron Man movie in there that's essentially a trailer for the Avengers, but we'll disguise it as an Iron Man movie so that it makes tons of money, because Iron Man was so well received. And that's where the movie really fails for me, as opposed to being more of an actual Iron Man story and Tony Stark's story, which is in there, but it feels like it takes a backseat to S.H.I.E.L.D. and Howard Stark and the Black Widow stuff, and we gotta get War Machine in there, and Nick Fury's gotta have a big role so that we can get to the Avengers, and that's like the one thing that you don't want to do when setting up a cinematic universe, is make an entire movie that is a trailer for the other movies. And that's what they did here, and it's unfortunate. On the plus side, though, they got their one bad movie out of the way right off the bat. So, I mean, we only have up to go from here. So next up is going to be Thor. Now, I was pretty scared when Thor was coming out, because you can really make this guy the cheesiest thing you've ever seen. This could easily have been a terrible, terrible movie that just went for all the ridiculous stuff that has to do with Thor and just completely lost you. Thankfully, they really didn't. They handled Thor, they handled the mythology, they handled Asgard really, really well. Because he is a Norse god from space who has a magic hammer and fights his brother who's magic and has a big helmet with big horns, and they have capes and, like, ride the rainbow bridge to other dimensions. And it can get so goofy when you think about it like that, but they really handled it well. They made it more of a kind of a fantasy movie. This is sort of like a Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones meets a superhero movie kind of thing. They handled that aspect really well. They made the Rainbow Bridge believable. They made Thor himself and the magic hammer and all that. They made that pretty cool. Unfortunately, we spend way too much time on Earth, in a desert, which is not that interesting. I mean, they have Asgard set up, and Asgard looks great when you first see it. I mean, it's all CG, but it looks awesome. It's pretty colorful, and it's fantastic, and it's a sci-fi extravaganza. It's awesome. And I like that we kind of start to set up some of Asgard's history and that sort of stuff, and we spend a big chunk of the beginning of the movie on Asgard. And that's where we should have stayed. But then Thor gets banished to Earth and ends up in New Mexico. Spends the rest of the movie in this tiny town in the middle of a desert, and it's one of the least visually interesting things in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, there is nothing here. Oh, okay, bye. There's really nothing here to look at, and he's not in his costumes. He's just kind of in plain clothes, and it's a bummer that we couldn't spend more time on Asgard, because that stuff was cool. And it felt like maybe Marvel was a little scared, because you could make this really stupid. So it feels like they might have been a little afraid to spend the whole movie there, and they wanted to kind of ease us into the world of Thor. So if we spend more time on Earth, it might be more relatable. I get that. But it still is just kind of a bummer that they didn't really go all out and just, hey, if we're doing Thor, we're going to do Thor. Asgard, have him ride the chariot with the goats. Okay, maybe don't do that. But you get what I'm saying. Have him in the cape, in the costume, with the hammer, the whole movie, fighting frost giants and trolls, and that would have been really, really cool to see, instead of the otherwise pretty forgettable movie that we got. Another issue that I have with the movie is the characters. Now, everybody from Asgard is a really good character. Thor, they make Thor pretty cool. He's kind of the whiny brat. I just want to conquer other worlds, and we should just fight and have wars because that's fun, and we got to show our strength. And that's not the right way you go about things. So Odin has to banish him to Earth to learn humility. And you get a really good arc with Thor, learning humility, learning what it is to be human in a way. Because he doesn't have his powers, he doesn't have his hammer, he's not a king. He's just a guy in the middle of this tiny little town in the middle of a desert. That'll probably teach you a thing or two. And Chris Hemsworth is a great Thor. He definitely looks the part. The dude is ripped. And I after so many movies with Chris Hemsworth as Thor, I really can't see anybody else playing Thor. He does a really good job. He's funny when he has to be. He's strong and charismatic when he has to be. He's stern. He does the kind of jerk, almost frat boy Thor version on Asgard pretty well. And you do feel that arc with him, and it does feel earned at the end when he becomes Thor again and earns the hammer again. I really like that stuff. So, the other characters are okay, but really nothing special. Natalie Portman as Jane Foster. Now again, Natalie Portman, I could talk about her for a while, because I'm halfway in love with her. She's a good-looking lady. She's not great in this movie. Jane Foster is kind of a meh character. She's a pretty bland love interest, who just falls all over Thor, because isn't he so hot? And that's really what it feels like, as opposed to, like, them actually having a connection. It just feels like, these are attractive people, now kiss. She does a fine job with what she has, but what she has isn't much. It's just generic scientist love interest. Her sidekicks, on the other hand, are annoying. Darcy. I don't even remember this actress's name. Kat Dennings, that's it. She is so annoying. She does nothing of interest or anything important. She's just there to be the wacky sidekick comic relief. And it doesn't work. It's not funny. She just comes across as obnoxious. And my God, does it get worse in Thor the Dark World. Now, this movie introduces us to one of the best villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Loki. Tom Hiddleston is so good as Loki. He has so much fun being the bad guy. And that is so great. He is the, as Thor puts it in Ragnarok, I think, says something like, he's a little Weasley, a little greasy. And, yeah, Tom Hiddleston does that well. He is Thor's brother, and he really does portray the brother who always has to play second fiddle, who lives in Thor's shadow his whole life, and just wants to be king, but knows that he never can be with his perfect brother Thor there. And you feel for Loki. He's not even really Asgardian. You find out he's adopted, and he was a frost giant. I mean, this guy went through a lot. His whole world came crashing down with that. His entire life was a lie. And you feel that. And that's what makes Loki one of the best characters, is because you really understand where he's coming from. Sorry, I had a notification on my phone. You really feel where Loki's coming from, and you appreciate kind of his journey. You can understand it. And you see what makes him be so bad. And he goes on to be one of the most compelling characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, through the Avengers, and through Thor the Dark World and whatnot. So overall, I don't have a whole lot more to say. Like I said, these movies are kind of the weakest ones. They're just sort of, they're there, and they're fine to watch during this marathon. I've kind of been just waiting to get to the better stuff. I mean, it was... I've been watching these 3 a week, and it was 3 weeks of just, alright, okay, that was decent. I'm more excited for 2 weeks from now when I get to watch the Avengers. So you watch them, and you don't really think about them too hard afterwards. I have them all on Blu-ray just because they're in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I have that whole collection. If they were just movies, if they didn't have the Marvel name on them, I don't know that I would own them. I definitely wouldn't own Iron Man 2. Maybe the Incredible Hulk, but probably not Thor. They're decent time passers. They do a fine job at introducing the character, but every single one of these characters goes on to bigger and better things in the future, and that makes me happy that they all have better sequels coming, better adventures in the Avengers. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to wrap this up so that it doesn't end up being like an hour video. Thanks a lot for watching. If you could like and subscribe, share this with your friends if you want, follow me on Instagram here. Like I said, I'm kind of slowly easing back into doing these, and will hopefully be back maybe later this week with my review of Captain America: The First Avenger. So look forward to that. Thanks for watching, guys.